Welcome back, deep divers. We're jumping headfirst into The Sun Also Rises today. We're using excerpts you sent in, and we're on a mission to really break down the characters and the setup in those early chapters. It's like getting a cheat sheet to understanding this whole world Hemingway's built.
That's a great way to put it. We're getting a close-up on how these characters are introduced and how their relationships start to tangle up right off the bat. It's all about getting a feel for their emotions and their world right from the beginning.
Makes sense.
Mm.
Okay, so let's start unpacking one of the main players, Robert Cohn. We hear he was taken in hand by a lady with big dreams tied to a magazine he was involved with. Sounds like he was pretty easily swayed right from the start.
Yeah, the interesting thing here is how Hemingway instantly shows us Kuhn's passivity in that relationship. It says he never had a chance of not being taken in hand. That kind of hints at him lacking self-direction, maybe something you see in people after a big war who are trying to figure out what they're supposed to do. Maybe
Hmm.
they end up getting swept up in someone else's ambitions. And the part where he was sure that he loved her makes you think he really needs to connect with someone, even if that connection is kind of messed up from the get-go.
Totally. And when the magazine went belly up, this forceful woman switched gears fast. She decided to grab everything she could while there was still something left to take. She pushes Cohn to Europe so he can write. It makes you wonder what she was really after, doesn't it?
It really does. And it makes you see Kuhn's whole move to Europe differently. Was it really about him being an artist, or was he just a pawn in her game? This starting point casts a bit of a shadow over everything he goes through and whether he's really in control of his life.
Then we get this quick rundown of his time in Europe, 1 year traveling, then 2 in Paris. And in Paris, he had these 2 separate friends, Braddock's, his literary friend, and our narrator, the tennis friend. It's almost like his friendships were sorted by what they did together.
You picked up on that, huh? It's interesting. Hemingway gives us these little details like quick brushstrokes to paint a picture of Cohn's life. It seems a bit compartmentalized, right? And yeah, the whole literary friend versus tennis friend thing, maybe it shows us different sides of Cohn's personality, like maybe they're not even that deep, or maybe it's about how close these friendships really were, early on at least.
And then we get to Kuhn's book. It's a very poor novel, but not as bad as the critics later claimed. Classic Hemingway, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like he's taking a jab at the critics while still admitting the book wasn't great.
You got it. It's not like Hemingway just trashes the book. He's giving us a more subtle take on it. Maybe he's suggesting that even a so-so book can find its people. Or maybe he's saying something about how tough critics can be, especially in a world where art is changing so fast. Makes you think.
His life in Paris sounds surprisingly normal for a writer living abroad. He's reading, playing bridge, tennis, even boxing at a gym. You'd expect more of that bohemian craziness.
Right. Maybe that's the point, though. This routine he has, maybe it shows he doesn't have that real passion, or maybe he feels lost. These activities, they're pretty solitary or structured. They don't have that spontaneous energy you'd expect from someone who's supposed to be embracing a new culture and bursting with artistic energy.
Right. Then we see one of the first social scenes, dinner at Lavenue's, then coffee at the Café de Versailles. Cohn brings up a weekend trip, maybe to Alsace. The narrator mentions knowing a girl in Strasbourg, and that's when the narrator drops that quiet little line about Cohn's lady. Evidently, she led him quite a life. What do you think Hemingway's getting at there?
Ah, that seemingly casual remark. Well, it says a lot. It implies that Kuhn's relationship was probably rocky or draining emotionally. It definitely made an impact on the narrator. It's like we get a glimpse of some trouble in Kuhn's past that might be shaping what he wants now and how he acts with other people.
For sure. And then we hit a turning point. Kuhn goes back to America with his novel, and it gets picked up by a fairly good publisher. That trip caused a huge fight, and it sounds like that's when Frances lost him. Feels like getting some recognition really shook things up between them.
It does feel like a big moment. His novel gets accepted, the literary world gives him a thumbs up, and suddenly the whole balance of power in his relationship with Frances changes. That awful row, it means there was a lot of conflict, maybe even resentment. Maybe Frances is feeling threatened by Cohn's newfound success and the change in his focus.
The narrator points out that Kuhn was a hit with the ladies in New York, and he came back to Paris, quite changed, more excited about America, not as simple, and get this, less nice. Looks like the praise went straight to his head, and his world, which used to revolve around Frances, suddenly got a whole lot bigger. Not the most flattering transformation.
It's interesting, right? The way Hemingway repeats less simple and less nice, it really points to a negative change in Cohn. It's like Success and all that attention inflated his ego and chipped away at whatever humility he had before, and that contrast with his smaller, earlier world really highlights how much that American experience changed him.
And then we get that pretty sharp judgment from the narrator. I am sure he had never been in love in his life.
It's harsh.
Do you think it's true?
Well, it's definitely a tough assessment, but it does fit with what we saw earlier, how his relationship with that ambitious woman was more about her plans and him feeling obligated. The narrator seems to be suggesting that Kuhn's feelings were more about needing someone or needing approval rather than actual two-way love.
Then we see Kuhn getting more and more unhappy with life in Paris. He feels like time is slipping away, like he's not really living. He even compares himself to bullfighters, saying their lives are abnormal.
Okay.
The irony there is pretty thick, considering how important bullfighting becomes later on.
Oh, yeah. The irony is definitely strong. It's clear that he's longing for a different kind of life, something more genuine. But the way he dismisses bullfighters shows that he doesn't really grasp what living truly means. It sets up this fascinating contrast with what actually happens to him and the group later.
This feeling that he's missing out fuels this intense desire to escape to South America.
Yeah.
It's the great trip he's got in his head. The narrator suggests British East Africa, even throws in the whole love affairs with the beautiful, shiny black princesses thing from books. But Kuhn's not having it. The narrator calls it a hard Jewish, stubborn streak. Kuhn is fixated on South America. What's with this laser focus?
This is a key moment to understand Cohn. He's stuck on South America even when there are other seemingly exciting options. It shows a certain rigidity in him. He clings to this perfect vision, probably inspired by those romantic ideas from literature. It highlights a disconnect between his fantasy and the real world.
The narrator tries to get Kuhn to see things clearly. He says going to another country doesn't make any difference, and that you can't run away from yourself just by changing location. He encourages Kuhn to really experience Paris. But Kuhn's mind is made up, I'm sick of Paris and I'm sick of the quarter. Pretty strong rejection of his current surroundings.
The narrator's talking from experience here. He's saying Cohn's discontent comes from within, not from the place he's in. But Cohn's aversion to Paris seems deep-rooted, maybe from what he went through earlier, or a deeper feeling of not belonging in this particular group of expats.
The narrator even suggests exploring Paris solo. But Kuhn tells this very boring story about getting stopped by a cop on a bike. Not exactly the life-changing adventure he seems to crave. The narrator realizes Kuhn's got two big ideas driving him, that South America will fix everything, and his hatred of Paris. And both seem to come from those literary fantasies he has, really shows that gap between what he expects and reality.
Right on. Cohn sees the world through the lens of the books he reads. It leads him to have unrealistic expectations and makes him unhappy with how complex and sometimes boring real life actually is. That bicycle cop thing, it's like a perfect, almost funny example of how disconnected he is.
Then we get this small glimpse into the narrator's life. He talks about being at work, getting off some cables, which tells us he's in the newspaper business. And he mentions the importance of graceful exits. It's a small detail, but it makes him feel more real, more grounded, right?
Definitely. We see his professional life, and it's a contrast to Cohn's more abstract desires, and that focus on graceful exits. Maybe it even foreshadows how the narrator handles his relationships and social interactions. He wants to navigate things with a sense of detachment.
Even though the narrator tries to keep some distance, Cohn keeps looking for him. He even shows up at the office and falls asleep. When he wakes up, he mentions a rotten dream and admits he didn't sleep well because of all the talking the night before. Makes you think something's bothering him, or maybe he's still fighting with Francis.
It's like Cohn needs to be around the narrator, even if it means falling asleep in his office. It shows how insecure and unhappy he is. That rotten dream and not sleeping, they point to some serious inner turmoil. Maybe things with the people around him are really strained.
And then boom, enter Lady Brett Ashley. The narrator meets her after having drinks with Cohn. He's instantly drawn to her grin and how she seems to hold back from fully laughing. It suggests she's holding something back, like there's more to her than meets the eye. What was your first impression of Brett from that initial description?
Brett makes quite an entrance. The way the narrator notices her smile and how she stops herself from really laughing, it makes her seem mysterious, like there's a lot going on beneath the surface. She's not a simple, easy-to-read character, that's for sure.
They grab a horse cab, and Hemingway describes the Avenue de l'Opera at night as broad and shiny and almost deserted. It sets a very specific mood, almost a lonely one.
Absolutely. The setting is crucial in how Brett is introduced. That empty avenue evokes a feeling of isolation, maybe even a hint of faded glamour, which fits with her enigmatic character.
Then we get a bar scene, which introduces us to more of the social world. Georgette, the woman the narrator was with earlier, is suddenly surrounded by men wanting to dance. We see Robert Cohn there, and Frances is dancing too. Then Mrs. Braddock introduces another rising new novelist, Robert Prentice, with that English accent, to this whole mix of expats and socialites. It feels like we're looking at a snapshot of a very specific time and place.
You get it. This bar scene gives us a glimpse of how the expat community operates, how relationships form and dissolve quickly. The introduction of another writer, Prentice, adds another layer to the literary context surrounding these characters.
And the dynamics get even clearer when Kuhn asks Brett to dance. She laughs it off, saying she already promised the narrator the dance. She even teases him about his hell of a biblical name, Jake. When Kuhn asks for the next dance, she says they've got a date in Montmartre. It's a subtle but definite brush-off for Cohn.
Oh yeah, Brett's interaction with Cohn is important. On the surface, it seems lighthearted, but she immediately shuts him down, mentions a previous engagement, showing she has zero romantic interest in him. But she's playful with the narrator, suggesting something closer, more intimate between them.
As the narrator dances with Brett, he sees Cohn watching them intently from the bar. Brett acknowledges she's caught his eye and dismisses him as a poor chap, totally oblivious to how he really feels. It's almost cruel how unaware she is.
That comment reveals how casually Brett handles the men around her. Maybe it's even a pattern she attracts unwanted attention, then distances herself. Calling Cohn a poor chap could be pity, but it could also be her way of dodging any responsibility for his feelings.
Their exchange hints at how complicated Brett is, maybe even careless with the way she handles men's affections. They leave the dance floor, and Brett chats with Kuhn at the bar while the narrator sorts out an envelope. Then they leave together in a cab, and out of nowhere, Brett says, "Oh, darling, I've been so miserable." Dramatic ending to the chapter. What do you think about that sudden shift?
That last line is powerful. It tells us there's this undercurrent of unhappiness beneath Brett's carefree facade. We don't know why she's miserable, which adds another layer of complexity to her character and her relationship with the narrator. Leaves you wanting to know more, right?
Definitely. The next chapter starts with a cab ride through Paris at night. We get this short moment of intimacy, followed by a hard rejection. Brett leans back with her eyes closed, and the narrator sits close. But after a kiss, she pulls away, moves as far from him as she can. It's a stark and painful picture of their dynamic.
The taxi ride sums up the main tension between them. There's this clear attraction, a desire, but something always blocks it. It could be Brett's own struggles or something from the outside. Her physically moving away in the cab after the kiss speaks volumes. It shows she can't fully return the narrator's feelings and how painful their connection is.
Back in his apartment, the narrator goes through his mail. It's all mundane stuff, a bank statement, a wedding announcement for people he doesn't even know. He thinks about titles, then dismisses Brett with a bitter, "To hell with Brett. To hell with you, Lady Ashley." He catches his reflection in the mirror and thinks about all the ways to be wounded. Then he turns to his bullfighting papers. It's like this moment of pure vulnerability, followed by him shutting down.
This scene gives us a powerful look into the narrator's internal world. You have the ordinary details of his mail, contrasted with his emotional pain. It's striking. His thoughts about being wounded, and then focusing on the bullfighting papers. Maybe it suggests he's looking for comfort, a distraction from his own suffering by diving into something traditionally masculine.
Then Brett shows up again, out of the blue. She says she was out with the Count. She talks about someone trying to get her to go to Cannes and Monte Carlo, but she said no because she knew too many people there. Then she says she told this person she was in love with the narrator. And then she asks if he wants to have dinner with this Count the next night. It's so confusing and almost manipulative. What do you think's going on here?
Brett's sudden reappearance and the contradictory things she says create this sense of instability. It makes you question her motives. She declares her love for the narrator, then immediately invites him to dinner with another man. It suggests a complicated dynamic, maybe even some emotional manipulation. It's hard to tell what she really wants.
Brett leaves late that night after another kiss on the stairs. The concierge mumbles something, and the narrator watches her drive off in a limousine. Back in his flat, all those feelings for Brett come rushing back. He realizes how much easier it is to be emotionally detached during the day compared to night. It shows how much of an impact she has on him, even when she's not there.
This ending scene highlights how vulnerable the narrator is. He tries to be detached during the day, but alone at night, his true feelings for Brett resurface. It reveals how invested he is and how much their unresolved connection hurts.
The next chapter switches to the narrator's morning routine in Paris. Coffee and brioche on the boulevard, reading the papers, watching daily life around him, and going to work. Hemingway really describes his walk in detail, focusing on the little sensory details of Parisian life. It's a big change in tone after the emotional intensity of the previous night.
This detailed description of his routine shows him trying to get back to normal, finding a sense of purpose in his everyday life. Focusing on the concrete aspects of Paris gives him a break from the drama and emotional turmoil of his relationship with Brett.
Later, the narrator waits for Brett at the Hotel Crillon, but she doesn't show. He writes letters, goes to a bar, and ends up at the Café Select where he runs into Harvey Stone. Their conversation is all cynical and humorous, talking about writers and how arrogant Cohn seems. Harvey even calls Cohn a moron and a case of arrested development. There's a lot of judgment going around in this circle.
That cafe scene gives us a peek into the intellectual and social dynamics of this expat group. The cynical banter, the harsh judgments, especially aimed at Cohn, reveal tensions and a sense of disillusionment that hangs over their interactions.
Cohn eventually joins them, and the teasing continues. He mentions struggling to write his second book and how he's lost that healthy conceit he had after his initial success in America. The narrator notices that before getting tangled up with Brett, Cohn never made remarks that distanced him from others. Sounds like his feelings for her have changed how he acts around people.
Cohn's writer's block and his dwindling confidence show how his emotions for Brett are destabilizing him. The narrator's observation about Cohn's social behavior highlights how his infatuation isolates him and negatively affects his relationships.
Then we have this run-in with Frances that shows just how tense and bitter things are between her and Cohn. She's clearly upset that he's not around and pointedly mentions the woman the narrator was with at the dance, who then left with Brett. Frances insists on talking to the narrator alone at the Dome, making it clear she wants to dish about Cohn. Feels like we're about to get another dose of interpersonal drama.
Frances showing up injects this other layer of conflict into the story. She's agitated, making pointed remarks, and it's obvious she's hurt and resentful towards Cohn. This sets the stage for a closer look at their crumbling relationship and all the emotions tangled up in it.
At the Dome, Frances drops the act and says she thinks Cohn is fixated on going back to New York for his book release and all the praise he expects. She thinks that ambition is the main reason he won't marry her. It's a pretty cynical take on his motives.
Frances's bitterness and her interpretation of Cohn's desires really expose the power dynamics and broken expectations in their relationship. She believes his ambition comes before his commitment to her, highlighting a major disconnect and making her feel deeply betrayed.
Back at the cafe, Frances keeps up her sarcastic remarks about Cohn, even bringing up a platonic encounter he had. Then she throws in that ironic quote, "We that live by the sword shall perish by the sword," telling Robert to remember it for his next book. She's clearly suggesting he's using their breakup for material and mocks his literary ambitions, comparing him to Anatole France, and not in a good way. Ouch.
Frances's sarcasm and literary references are a way for her to deal with her pain and anger. Her accusations that Cohn's using their relationship for his writing show how cynical she is about artistic integrity and how easily people can be exploited in the pursuit of art.
Frances even offers this bleak theory about why Cohn won't marry her.
Yeah.
She thinks he always secretly wanted a mistress, and by not marrying her, he's essentially had one. She sees marriage as the death of romance. It's a very disillusioned view of love and commitment.
Frances's final declaration reflects a really disillusioned perspective on love and marriage, shaped by her painful experience with Cohn. It emphasizes the theme of disillusionment running through the novel and how traditional values are being questioned by many of the characters.
Before moving on, we get a little break with the concierge, who shares some observations about Brett's recent guest, a very large gentleman. The concierge's opinion shifts from not so genteel to très gentil and a very good family. It's a kind of funny, superficial glimpse into how Brett is perceived by the people around her.
The concierge's quick assessment gives us a humorous outsider's view of Brett. It's based on brief encounters and maybe some societal prejudices. It reminds us that people are often judged by appearances and social status.
Then we hear that Bill Gorton's coming to town. Shortly after, Brett returns to the narrator's apartment with the Count, who's holding a huge bouquet of roses. This sets the stage for another potentially tense encounter.
Bill's arrival hints at a change in the group dynamic, while Brett coming back with the Count immediately brings back those complicated romantic entanglements and the tension in her relationship with the narrator.
And what follows is a tense back and forth between Brett and the narrator. She asks for a drink, and while he's getting ready, he hears them talking. He admits to feeling tired and pretty rotten. Brett comes in, offers him a drink, and tells him she loves him. Then, out of nowhere, she says she'll send the Count away. Surprisingly, the narrator says no. It's a whirlwind of emotions and mixed signals. What do you think about the narrator refusing her offer?
This scene is loaded with unspoken emotions and power struggles. Brett's actions are contradictory. She says she loves the narrator, then immediately offers to get rid of another suitor. It shows her own internal struggles and her complicated, possibly manipulative relationship with the narrator. His passive refusal, maybe it's because he's exhausted, resigned, or maybe he just doesn't want a confrontation.
Brett comes back after sending the Count for champagne. The narrator finally asks the big question: can they be together? But Brett shuts it down, saying she would inevitably trump you with everybody, and he couldn't handle it. She blames it on her nature. She dismisses the idea of escaping to the country together, saying it wouldn't work with her own true love. Then she announces she's leaving, Mike's coming back, insists it's better for both of them, and that she's going to San Sebastian alone. She refuses the narrator's plea to go with her. It's heartbreaking, the seemingly final rejection.
This is a turning point, emotionally brutal for the narrator. Brett refuses to commit, says her nature prevents a stable relationship. These are seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Her decision to leave, mentioning Mike, suggests a pattern of destructive relationships in her life.
The Count gets back with the champagne, and they try to act normal, drinking and making conversation. The Count talks about wine, his business trip to Abyssinia, showing off some scars. Then he takes them to dinner in the Bois, which is described as a great party with amazing food and wine. It's surreal how this fancy dinner contrasts with the emotional wreckage we just witnessed.
The Count's presence and the shift to a social setting provide a temporary distraction from Brett's rejection, but you know the tension and the narrator's unresolved feelings are still simmering beneath the surface of the party.
After dinner, the Count innocently asks why they don't just get married. They both give vague excuses about wanting their own lives and careers. Then they go to Zelli's, a packed and noisy nightclub, and dance. Later at Brett's hotel, they kiss at the door, but she pushes him away before going inside. The narrator goes back to his flat, his feelings for Brett still a mess as these early chapters end. It feels like this cycle of desire and rejection, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. That final scene sums up the push and pull between them. They have these brief moments of intimacy immediately followed by her pulling away. It leaves the narrator in emotional limbo, highlighting how their connection is cyclical and ultimately impossible.
So we've gotten a good look at the initial dynamics in The Sun Also Rises. We see Robert Cohn's disillusionment and how he relies on those romanticized ideas. We see the super complicated and painful relationship between the narrator and Brett, full of desire and rejection. And we're introduced to other characters like Francis and the Count, all adding to this picture of post-war expat life in Paris. What are your thoughts?
Hemingway is so skillful at establishing those core conflicts and character traits early on. You instantly get this feeling of restlessness, a yearning for something more, and these often broken, emotionally charged relationships that will fuel the rest of the story.
It's true. Think about Cohn, how he almost comically bases his life on literary tropes. Think about Brett's contradictory actions and her justifications for her behavior.
Yeah.
And what about the narrator? He seems detached, yet he's so vulnerable. These early chapters are full of nuances that hint at the bigger themes Hemingway explores throughout the book.
Exactly. These introductions, the web of relationships, they're crucial to understanding what drives these characters and what unfolds as the story goes on. They lay the groundwork for all the journeys and experiences that follow.
You've now got a solid foundation for understanding the world of The Sun Also Rises. What resonated most with you in these opening chapters? What questions do you have about these characters and their motivations as they head off on their summer adventures?
Don't forget how these early encounters touch on those big themes of disillusionment, searching for identity and meaning after the war, and the often painful complexities of love and human connection. It's all there from the start.
Absolutely. One last thing to ponder, considering the narrator's observation about how hard it is to stay hard-boiled at night, how do you think these characters will change as they leave Paris and face new challenges? Is their cynicism during the day a true reflection of how they feel deep down? Or is it a fragile defense that'll crumble under the pressure of the fiesta in Spain? It's something to think about as you continue reading The Sun Also Rises. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.